Now, I'm very excited. On this edition of Isolation Interviews, my guest is, well, he is one of the chasers. He is, of course, the Dark Destroyer, Shaun Wallace. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, Matthew. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. How are you doing?
I'm coping very well. Yeah, I'm fine. I'm good.
Now, obviously, everything's a bit weird at the moment. Life in lockdown is a bit strange. How are you finding being, the whole situation of lockdown? How are you finding it?
It's unnatural, obviously, to be sort of, confined to a, closed environment. When I say closed environment, your house without actually being sent to prison for committing a criminal offence. So I've coped fairly well, actually. I train 3 times a day now. I train twice a day to try and keep myself fit. So I've trained. I still do my legal work because I still practice as a barrister. And obviously, in relation to taking part in setting quizzes, I've been inundated with requests, either hosting or taking part in quizzes, and writing quizzes as well. And also revising, because obviously at some point, lockdown will be lifted, and I've got to get back to my part-time job as being a Dark Destroyer on the chase.
Now, of course, at the moment, life, like I say, it's completely turned up on its head, and people are having to find different things to keep themselves occupied, to keep themselves sane. Obviously, a lot of people wouldn't necessarily know that your day job, your actual job, is as a barrister. So, first of all, how did you get into that line of work? And then how did the quizzing come along for you?
Well, I've always wanted to be a barrister ever since I was 11 years old, and I wrote an autobiography called Chasing the Dream, so plug. I've been a criminal barrister since 1984. So far as quizzing is concerned, I always used to love quizzing as a young boy, sitting watching programs like University Challenge, Winner Takes All, all the sort of quiz shows which are on blockbusters. And I always used to find it impressive that somebody can actually put themselves up to actually answering questions in an artificial studio under the pressure of a studio audience, being grilled by a very intimidating question master. And I wanted to see how good I was, because it's easy answering questions on the comfort of your sofa, but I wanted to see how good I was. So in 1999, I just got into quizzing, not to try and win prizes, but to see how good I was as a competitor. And if there was a prize at the end of it, then I'd claim it.
As I say, the thing with quizzing is you have to be able to absorb knowledge. How do you go about, kind of like learning all this stuff? Because are you someone that can just read books and keep knowledge? Do you have to visualize things? How do you kind of keep it all in your head?
I think the form for learning and being a good quizzer is a simplistic one. If you're interested in something, you're going to remember it. And everybody has an interest in something. My favorite subject is history, and most quizzers, the top quizzers in the world, are very good because their history is good. History tells a story of the origins of an entity, of a person, of a state, or indeed of a subject. And if you have an appreciation of history in terms of the origins of where things started, then that is a good grounding in terms of having an interest in other subjects, the history of literature, the history of music, the history of football, the history, you name it. History, I think, is that thread which weaves, all subjects together, the history of science. I wasn't a science an aficionado, but I gained a love of science by virtue of my, fascination and interest in how things began. And from there on in, you get an appreciation for that particular subject. Every Achilles does have a heel. And my weakest subjects are soaps. I don't like soaps, I don't watch soaps. When I'm asked a question on the chase, I usually either have to guess it or make an educated guess, especially when it comes to The Simpsons, because although it's the most popular animated series, I've never watched an episode.
Really?
Or Family.
Wow.
No, never.
Now, of course.
Sorry, Matthew. That's why one time when I was walking away from winning a chase, and they asked me what colour's Marge Simpson's hair, didn't have a clue. I said orange. And the Twitter backlash I got was, you just couldn't believe it.
That's the thing. Wow. With the chase, it is such a popular program. It's been around for over 10 years now. How did it first come about for you? How did they first approach you to be on the show?
Well, how it started for me is I retired after winning Mastermind in 2004. because for me that was winning. That's the ultimate pinnacle in terms of the doing of all quiz shows. Then I was enticed out of retirement by a show called Eggheads, because they were looking for a new egghead. And they approached me on a number of occasions. I turned them down. I said, look, I don't want to take part in this competition because I'm just not interested. And they gradually wore me down. Anyway, I managed to get to the grand final. And I was the only competitor out of the 32 who were invited to take part to find a new egghead, who had to play the quarter-final, semi-final, and final all in one day. So I was in the studio for 13 hours.
Wow.
And I lost to Barry. We became very, very good friends. And although, as I say, it was a devastating moment when I did lose, I sat in the car park of the BBC car park for a whole hour listening to Steely Dan's greatest hits. And from there on in, I decided to write my autobiography. But how I got into the chase is when, in October 2008, I got a phone call from ITV to take part in what they considered to be an exciting new game show concept. So I went along for an audition. They asked me about 30 questions. I got about 28 out of 30. So they asked me what was I doing quiz-wise. So I said, look, I'm not really doing anything. I've actually retired from quizzing. I said, oh, by the way, I'm on Are You an Egghead? And they said to me, how well did you do? I said, I'm not telling you. If you want to see how good I was, you get my audition. So I think they contacted the BBC to find out how well I did do. Because when they showed the grand final on December 2nd, 2008, the following day I was in front of an ITV commissioning panel. So I was working on that show by myself. I had to go through 3 separate auditions, trying to convince ITV that this was a really good concept, by myself for about 5 months. Then they brought in Mark. We then went up to Manchester to do a 10-show pilot, and the rest, they say, is history.
I was going to say, the show has just gone from strength to strength. I mean, I had the pleasure of interviewing Anne Hegarty last year, and she's obviously a powerhouse as well. I mean, you've got some really strong people on that show.
Yeah.
Is there rivalries between you guys, or do you all kind of...
No, I'm sure Anne would have told you the same thing. When I first met Mark, I said, look, the only way this show is going to be a success is if we support each other and there's no egos. Because if there's going to be egos, then it's going to create tension, problems, jealousy, and the show, it would filter through to the public. So every chaser who's been appointed, first Anne in 2010, then Paul in 2011, Jenny in 2015, and now Dara in 2019, have bought into that concept. And we do generally rate each other, respect each other, and support each other. So there's no real egos. Obviously, in relation to, there is a win-loss ratio. Mark's the statistician because he's a qualified maths teacher. So he keeps all the stats. So, you know, we know who's top, we know who's bottom. But it doesn't mean to say that we've got any disrespect towards anybody who's at the bottom or, you know, sort of kowtowing by the mere fact that you're by the top. So we get on very, very well.
And I mean, when obviously the show first started, and obviously Bradley Walsh is the host, who is fantastic, did you know much about Bradley before joining the show, and were you a fan?
I didn't know Bradley itself. I knew obviously he'd done shows like Coronation Street. And the first time I knew Bradley was the host, because obviously when I was doing the various run-throughs, we had different hosts. And the various hosts they brought in, to be fair, I seen Wood being more animated. But when they brought in Bradley for the very first show we did, I thought, oh, you know what, guess what? This could work because this guy is witty, he's funny, you know, and it just proved to be a masterstroke in getting him to be the host. And as I say, that really catapulted Bradley into the national consciousness in terms of his dexterity as a host, as a comedian, as a serious actor. And you know, you obviously see on the show what a witty and funny man he is. So, you know, Bradley's obviously the glue which holds the show together. But without that, you've got different types of chasers with different types of characteristics in terms of their character. But the one thing which binds all chasers together is their mammoth intellect.
I mean, the other thing with the show is that obviously you get a lot of people that come on the show that you guys know from quizzing circles. So do you get told beforehand that they're coming on, or is it normally a complete surprise?
No, that's not necessarily true, because obviously if it's somebody we know, then obviously they can't take part. But, you know, they do let the odd quiz person through. And if it's somebody who any of us have played, then obviously we've got to declare. So we get sent a list of names of the contestants who are about to take part in the filming block we're going to be doing. And if we know them, we just got to say, and we do.
And of course, recently we saw the brand new Beat the Chasers, which is even bigger than the normal show. When you were first told about that concept, you must have thought this is just absolute genius.
Well, as I say, what the end product which you see now is completely different from when we first started it. So, you know, every show goes through an evolution process before you get to the end product. And it's only when you test out the end product initially in a dry studio without the absence of a studio audience, and you realise, yes, this can work. Then obviously when you get the studio audience in, and so it proves, you know, that was a 5 pilot show. It proved to be fairly successful. So, you know, fingers crossed if we get another commissioning from it. And if we do, then it's really, really good.
Is it more enjoyable when you guys get to work as a real team and you guys can you know, beat, you know, all 5 of you can potentially beat just, you know, one individual?
We can, but remember, you know, it's obviously really good that we're working together as a unit. But obviously, when it comes to the final showdown between the contestant and whoever chasers are left to face that contestant, obviously it flips because the chasers are on the buzzer. So obviously, you know, there may appear to be a race to see if you could answer the question quickly as a chaser. I've never played that tactic. I would always leave the buzzer to a person I know who definitely knows the answer. And as you saw in the pilot, you know, we did make mistakes because of the fact that we were either too buzzer happy or we didn't sort of, you know, take a beat, even though it's very, very difficult to judge how long you should wait before you buzz in to see whether or not any of your fellow chasers know the answer.
I imagine if you do get that where someone buzzes in too quickly, I imagine that, I mean, it's more, I can imagine that it'd be more the person themselves that buzzed in and got it wrong would kind of beat themselves up as opposed to you guys kind of going, oh, God, you know.
There were occasions where you saw Paul sort of give the sort of cold stare. I didn't do that. It's human nature, I suppose, to sort of, you know, how did you get that wrong? But, you know, sometimes we were chasing the time and somebody had to answer it. And again, it takes courage to answer a question. Even if you get it wrong, it still takes courage.
Now, obviously, like I was saying at the beginning, the whole process has had to stop. I mean, you've not been able to film anything new for a while. So I imagine that the minute you guys can get back into kind of, you know, creating the shows, you'll be glad to kind of get back in and get the shows going.
Yeah, because, you know, the chase isn't immune to any sort of, you know, the lockdown virus. And I'm sure up and down the country, people are waiting to get back to, you know, what they're doing best in terms of using their skills to actually carry out their place of employment or whatever. So the chase is no different. And obviously we are looking forward to the point where lockdown is lifted, but it can only take place once we know that it's 100% safe to do so, because you know, life's more important than entertainment.
Exactly. Now, obviously, in your spare time, you're also, like you were saying, you're doing a lot of quizzes, because, I mean, I've just been seeing over Twitter, a lot of you guys have been getting inundated with all the kind of, will you appear on our quiz? Will you host? Will you do this, do that? I mean, it must be nice that they want you involved, but you kind of get to the point where you can't do them all.
No, I can't do them all. And, you know, obviously, if I can, I'll do it. If I can't, I won't. It's as simple as that. I'm under no obligation to do so. I do so because I want to, not because I have to. And, you know, I can't speak for my fellow chasers, but if I get asked a lot to send, you know, messages of support, encouragement to people on Twitter, and I'll always do that. But I do it because I want to, not because I have to.
It's also a great way because you're helping to sort of lift people's spirits, because I mean, everyone loves, you know, a nice little message, sort of, you know, wishing someone well and all that.
Exactly. And I'll always do that. It's not a problem. I don't have an issue with that, because, you know, we're all rowing in the same boat towards the same destination to try and get lockdown lifted, so that we can all return to a very safe and sort of COVID-19 free environment. So we're all looking forward to that situation. And if I can, in some little way, help lift somebody's spirits, then I'll do so.
Now, obviously, going forward, we're hoping, you know, there will be more of the chase. But is there a kind of a dream that you would love to do going forward? Is there like something you would love to accomplish yourself?
What, in terms of entertainment and the entertainment?
Yeah, anything that maybe like something personal that you think you
Well,
would love
guess
to
what?
try.
Anything I do in TV is a bonus. Remember, I'm a lawyer first, who happens to be on television, and it will always be that way. And I'm very, very privileged and fortunate to be on a show that's lasted so long. And if it goes, then obviously I'll be sad, but it doesn't define my life. Obviously, I'll always be forever remembered as being a member of the Chasers. But I'm a lawyer first and foremost, and that's how it is.
Now, I just want to say it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Just before we go, though, is there any messages you'd like to give to anyone who's listening in hospital or anyone who's watching at home that is just a bit fed up with the situation that we're in?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a situation that we're all involved in, and it's very, very difficult for even the best of us in terms of the levels of our patience and endurance and endeavour. But the one thing I will say to this, the one thing I love about being British is that we know how to cope with adversity. We know how to actually deal with adversity. And the one thing we as British people know how to do is to defeat adversity. It's part of our DNA, it's part of our fabric. And yes, it's very, very difficult for everybody, but we will come out of this. It's sad that people have lost their lives so far as this particular pandemic is concerned. But the one thing we can always take comfort from is that those people who have lost family members and friends, is that we as a community are always with you. You're always in our thoughts. And once the lockdown goes, so far as I'm concerned, I'm sure so far as Britain is concerned, you'll forever be in our thoughts. And all I can simply say is stay safe, stay well. We will come out of lockdown and we will emerge from this a stronger and better nation.
Thank you, Shaun. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. And of course, keep safe. And thanks again.
My pleasure. Take care.